When I originally started on my healing journey, the path wasn't very clear. I pretty much just stumbled in the dark, but with each step, I got closer and closer to the truth, to my truth, because this was my journey. And some of you might be on your own healing journeys, stumbling around, trying to figure out the best way to really break free from some of the patterns that are holding you back, some of the wounds that you're still carrying. And often when we begin the healing process, usually resulting from some sort of stress, conflict, we start with some idea that we have in mind as to why we're in this current state, what's really bothering us. But when we dig deeper, we realize the initial stress that brought us to seek assistance, to begin this path of healing, wasn't the original issue. When we dig deeper, we find the real reason as to what's really going on and what's sort of keeping us bounded to our wounds. And I'll give you an example. When I saw my second therapist in 2016, I originally sought her out because I was going through a terrible breakup. It was a very toxic relationship. And I thought I was going to see her to help manage my breakup. And there were things about myself that I wanted to change as a partner. And I wanted to get some clarity as to, why was I doing the things that I was doing? At the moment, I didn't realize it, but I came to therapy for a very surface level reason. And then probably after the first or second session, I was like, oh, and this has nothing to do with my breakup. We already know that relationships are mirrors, and they really shine a light to the parts of ourselves that have some of the deepest wounds. And as someone who has been in the mental health field for quite some time, often my clients come in for a specific reason. And then as we dig deep, we really find, usually by the first session, we realize how deep the situation truly is. And I'm all for whatever gets us on that path, whatever gets us in that door, because we all need some sort of doorway to begin this process. I always say change can only happen through depth. If something in our lives is not changing, it's because we haven't gone deep enough. Most of the people that I've met with have tried all types of modalities. They've met with other practitioners, and yet they still find themselves stuck. They find themselves looking for, what is the next step? Where do I begin? If I've tried all these things, where do I really begin to begin healing some of these wounds? So this is what I'm going to discuss in today's Monday message as briefly as I can. I'm thinking about doing a live, which I'll go a bit more in depth. But I want to talk about the 5 key elements that I believe is the foundation for change to occur. So think of this as a mini masterclass. Element number 1. This one's a big one. And I would say that it's quite hard for a lot of folks, but this is where you start. Inner child healing. And some of you have already taken my crash course to inner child healing, so you have a really deep understanding about it already. If you haven't, you can catch the replay in the description below. Or if you've attended one of our retreats, you've gotten an in-person live session on this material already. But healing your inner child is so important, because without healing your inner child, doesn't matter how many skill sets that you have, doesn't matter your class, how wealthy you get, it doesn't matter how much notoriety you receive, it doesn't matter how many degrees you have, it really doesn't matter. The inner child does not discriminate based on your status or intellect. Everybody at some point is faced to deal with their hurt inner child. So if you're looking to begin, this is the place. Healing your inner child is key to restoring the relationship that you have with yourself and also the relationship you have with other people. Healing your inner child also eliminates the internal war with self. Gabor Mate is this doctor who's trauma informed, and he's done a lot of work around this stuff. He had said that some people will say, oh, my childhood was pretty good. Like nothing really happened. Whenever he did talks, one of the questions that he would ask people in the room is, did you have somebody to talk to? Was there someone that when you were feeling a certain way, sad, excited, happy, depressed, did you have someone to talk to? And almost like 95% of people in the room didn't have someone to talk to. And that's a form of trauma. And that's often how loneliness is developed at such a young age, when we don't really have anyone to connect to as you develop. And if there's certain life stages in your inner child that have not been completed, that is your job to do so. Usually when we're interacting with other people's inner child. So if you see Karen having a tantrum at Walmart, that's her inner child. That's not Karen. She may look like an adult, but that's her inner child. Or if you're driving down the streets in Boston and somebody flips you off because they thought that you cut them off, that's that person's inner child. If we don't have a handle on our inner child and our inner child becomes triggered by something, feels threatened, hurt, or harmed, what we will see is adults acting like children. When we get scared or hurt is when our inner child comes out to protect us. And if there's no responsible adult around, this inner child will wreak havoc and create a lot of chaos and dysfunction in our lives until it feels safe. For me, I used to take things very personally. I used to emotionally react impulsively without thought. I had no window of tolerance to navigate my emotions. And window of tolerance is just basically the minute that something happens to us and the response between that thing. So if something happens to me, am I able to really stay calm and collected before I react? Because if I react from that raw place, I might say something that I might regret. I might say something that's inappropriate. I might say something that causes more damage. So what is the window of tolerance within you? So if you start anywhere, you start with the inner child. You start healing your inner child. And inner child is not just about healing all the pain, but it's also about play. It's also about connecting to the things that used to bring you joy, the things that used to bring you wonder and curiosity. All of that is tied into the inner child. The second element on this path that is so crucial, in my mind, it actually comes first, but just the way that our human brains operate, because we think so much, it's easier to begin the process through your inner child. But the second element is repairing our nervous system. I believe that our bodies are the first responders to what's too much to bear. And sometimes you could call that trauma. And trauma is anything that happens too fast, too soon, all at once. And that could be anything. My co-facilitator, Lily, teaches this very beautiful class on the nervous system. She only teaches it at our retreats, but start here. All of us view our worlds through our nervous systems. For example, if I grew up in a household that was very frightening, when I go out into the world, that is how I'm going to see the world, because that fear is literally shaping my nervous system. My body is going to react out of fear. And my nervous system is going to do one of three things. It's going to shut down, it's going to freeze, or it's going to run away. I was somebody who would first shut down and then I'd take off. So you might find yourself vacillating between one of the three at any given moment. As children, if we were in households that didn't allow us to express a wide range of emotions, especially very big feelings, and if we were put down for that, especially if we were very sensitive kids, if we're not allowed to feel those emotions, our nervous systems over time become really damaged. And to repair this can feel very scary at first. But a very minimal way to start this is using our breath. A lot of us have very shallow breathing. So using breath to bring us to a more calm and grounded state, that will help reset our nervous systems. Meditation, as we already know, and a lot of people say, I really have a hard time with meditation. But even if you're doing 1 to 5 minutes a day, will reset your nervous system over time. The whole point is to find the things that really soothe us. Because if we don't, we're going to be responding even within our relationships through our nervous systems. And this is why I like plant medicines, because plant medicines will literally go into your body to reset your nervous system in ways that I feel like the only other way, like I mentioned, is breath work and meditation. And if those things are hard for people, plant medicines is really a surefire way to change and reconstruct our brain patterns. I've seen people who've come into plant medicine ceremonies who are incredibly anxious. And then for that moment, they're able to dial into the radio silence of their minds. And what I mean by that is that they're finally able to experience what it's like to have their brain not be on constant chatter, overdrive, and overthinking. So that contrast to them allows them to see that that's a possibility, that their lives can actually be without anxiety. And the same thing with those folks who struggle with depression. They come in really in a depressed state, and then afterwards there's this uplift about them, a feeling that they've never felt before. And so it's all about knowing that it's possible. What happens is that we've experienced so much trauma in our lives, or so much disappointment or heartache, that we don't know what it's like to not be without that. So to even get a glimpse of that possibility is so empowering for a lot of people. One thing I always have my clients do, and I might have done this in the video, but one thing I have my clients do is when they're in moments of stress, conflict, and even anxiety or depression, I tell them to put a hand over their chest like this, like a cross. and close their eyes and really sink into their bodies and just ask themselves, what do I need right now? Ask your inner child, what do you need right now? And just listen and feel, because your body is actually going to give you the answers. So the goal is, because we've been so disconnected from our inner child and from our bodies, this is our way of building that connection, of repairing that connection within ourselves. Because the more that we have this self-awareness, the more that we can notice these things in our environment, so that we can really navigate and avoid some of the chaos and dysfunction and destruction that might normally take place. The third element on this healing journey is grief and loss. Grief holds a very special place in my heart. And I've lost a lot of people in my life. I lost my father, I lost my mother, my grandmother, my brother. So I am very familiar with grief. I've lost identities, I've changed careers. No one ever goes into therapy and say, "Hey, I'd like to work on my grief and loss." Like, no one no one does that, because we don't actually realize how paramount it is and how pervasive managing loss in our lives actually is. Even when I went to see that therapist, I didn't go in there thinking like I had to grieve this relationship, or I had to grieve the person I thought I was in that relationship. But I realized I had to grieve that relationship. I had lost myself. I had to grieve Francis, figure out who I wanted to be moving forward. And many of us experience grief on a daily basis. We experience loss on a daily basis. It could be as small as, I order something at the restaurant, I come home and it's not what I ordered. And there's a sense of disappointment, there's a sense of loss, to the ultimate loss of losing somebody that we really care about, someone that we love. So we have to honor that grief and we have to honor that loss. I want you to keep in mind that grief and loss is held inside of our organs like most emotions. You'll find that grief and loss is in our lungs and large intestines. And since our lungs control the flow of energy in our bodies, if we're not processing that grief, then we are blocking our energy flow, which can often result in inflammation of the body, tiredness, just complete lack of energy. I remember I had this client, she was a nurse practitioner. She was suffering from some major grief, unprocessed grief, I should say, a lot of loss. She had miscarried, and then a year later, her partner passed away. And she just went right back to work. And that's not an uncommon story. I remember talking to a entrepreneur who had a miscarriage, and she was accepted into an accelerator program the following week, and she never took the time to grieve that miscarriage. So with my client, we spent a lot of time on what it means to process that grief. And it's scary and it's painful, but unprocessed grief causes a lot of diseases in our bodies. And unprocessed grief doesn't allow you to fully heal and be alive. Unprocessed grief is painful. It could cause a lot of damage to our bodies and disconnect us from ourselves and disconnect ourselves from our relationships. And this is why I like certain plant medicines, because there's a lot of them will go into the lymphatic system and will find some of the dense energies in our bodies and release them, so that folks can feel a lot lighter and gain the clarity that they need. You have to understand that often some of these energies and some of the things that we've been carrying for generations upon generations. We think that it's just for this lifetime, but if there's a history there, a history of depression, anxiety, a history of unprocessed grief, it's going to be passed on. So when you do this healing work, you're not just doing it for yourself, you're really reconstructing your lineage. This is why this work is so, so crucial. So if you're in this stage, if there's a lot of unprocessed grief, I just want you to take a moment and do an audit of your life and ask, what grief am I not processing at this moment? Wherever there's anger and resentment, you can follow that trail up to grief. Another question I typically have my clients answer, because usually sometimes change is hard for us, is because we're hoping that something would be different. We're hoping that our childhoods would have been different. We're hoping that our relationships or careers would have been different. And 9 out of 10 times they're not. And so how do we deal with the fact that those circumstances are unchangeable? That's grief and loss. Now we're on the fourth element on this healing journey. And if you're here at the fourth element, thanks for sticking with me. And I hope that so far that you're gaining some gems or feeling excited to, I know it's hard work and we don't want to feel these things, but there is a roadmap that you can actually follow But the fourth element on this journey is spirituality. And a lot of us don't like to talk about it, or, we all have really interesting, complicated relationships with spirituality. I mean, I grew up in a very religious household, and I was like, bump this. I am out of here. I am not doing anything related to anything religious. And I did that for a long time. And I've circled back in a very different way, not part of any organized religion. But I do understand, for at least for myself, that there is a spiritual connection. And I've connected with that part of myself. I'm sure you've heard it before that we are all spiritual beings having a physical experience here on this earth. And some people do believe that, there is no afterlife. We're born, we live, we work, and we die. That's totally fine. Me adding this element has nothing to do with trying to convince you otherwise. I just know from my own personal journey and having worked with so many clients and seeing some of the systems that I've worked in, that there was a missing element, and that was the spirit. And so that's why I moved away from a lot of the traditional mental health paradigms, because I noticed that people weren't really getting better because the spirit wasn't getting better. What I found is that Western medicine will try to solve a spiritual problem through a biological perspective. They'll use things like big pharma, not realizing that illness of the body comes from an imbalance of the heart, an imbalance of the mind, comes from distorted belief systems, comes from the foods that we eat, our environments. So there's a lot of branches here that need tending to, right? It's not just like take a pill and you're done with it. And I believe that there's a huge spiritual disconnect that has a lot of us questioning our purpose and our existence. Why are we here? Again, I'm not talking about organized religion, but the idea that we're connected to something much greater than ourselves. And when we neglect tending to our spiritual hygiene, it causes a lot of imbalances within our body, and then it causes imbalances within the world, because we are energetic beings. And part of the spirituality could be just reconnecting with nature. A lot of us are attached to the grid. We live in big cities, small cities, and we're not in nature enough. And I mean, you could do your own research, but there's a lot of positive research about the connection between nature and how it alleviates stress and depression, inflammation in our bodies, all of those things, how it brings serotonin into our systems, allowing us to feel the peace and joy that is originally our birthright to feel, to experience. We're on the fifth and final element of this healing journey, and it's just maintenance. I always tell my clients relapse is part of change. So don't beat yourself up about it. The goal is, well, how can I shorten those relapses over time? So if I'm relapsing a couple times a week, maybe now I'm relapsing once a month. I mean, once every other month, and so forth. So maintenance is important because we can learn all these things we can about our inner child, our nervous systems. We can connect and have a spiritual practice. But if we don't maintain the knowledge and turn it into wisdom, so it really seeps into our bodies and it really resonates in a way that we embody some of these, then it's all for naught. And the way that we maintain this is through rituals. I don't call it morning routines or I got to be more disciplined. Like, those words don't resonate with me. Obviously, choose whatever words resonate with you. But I just call it loving rituals with ourselves. It's almost like, when you begin a yoga practice and you did it, for like 7 days straight, and then one day you didn't do it and you feel kind of off, right? You might feel a little bit tighter, stiffer, a bit more on edge, not as calm. So it's not necessarily about perfection. I want to make that very clear. It's about consistency. We have to pour into ourselves as much as we can. And I say this because there's a lot happening in the external world that is set up for us to disengage and disconnect. So these practices are set up to protect our energy flows. They're set up to protect our connections with ourselves. I always say to folks, like, people want to save the world, but they don't realize that in order to save the world, you have to save yourself first. So the best thing that we can do is to commit and invest in our own healing. I had a client recently, and she was shocked at the fact that, so she took a step back from meddling in her loved one's affairs, because she was always the person that took care of everything, superwoman complex. She took everything on, and she decided to take a step back and just focus on herself because she was so committed to other people's journeys. She was committed to other people's mental health that she neglected her own. But the minute that she started to commit to this process, she literally saw how the people around her began to change without her even mentioning anything. And that will happen the minute that you begin to make changes, because there's no reason, you don't need to yell at the rooftops that you're doing XYZ. All you have to do is live it and embody it. And that energy is going to attract others to do the same because they're going to feel the difference. People are going to be like, dang, girl, you glowing, right? You glowing. What you wearing? You're like peace, alignment, joy. So the more she took care of herself, the more that everyone around her was taken care of. That's all I've got for this mini masterclass on Monday's message. It's a lot longer than anticipated, but I just really wanted to break these elements down because they're just so crucial for us in finding the balance, the peace, the love, and the joy, and the alignment, those high vibratory emotions that we're all deserving to have. And I understand that not everybody's going to agree with these elements. That's totally fine. We're not supposed to all agree with each other. My partner always says, eat the meat, spit out the bones, take what works, leave what doesn't. However, at the end of the day, I trust that you will take at least one of these elements and begin making some profound and beautiful changes in your life. So thank you for watching another Monday message. Definitely share this one with somebody that you care about and just drop it in. Don't even say nothing, just drop in the link and walk away. But like, subscribe, and share, and I will see you on the other side of change.